Our guest today is Katie Graham, Managing Director at McCoy Consulting. And today we're going to talk about what is ad promo, how does the Chevron decision influence the FDA or the FTC, should administrative agencies cite letters, can the FDA establish rules after someone challenges them, the uncertainty of compliance white space, and finally, is the regulatory medical advice now just seen as a risk? And I am Darshan Kulkarni, Principal Attorney at the Kulkarni Law Firm. I focus my attention on FDA-regulated companies and their service providers, including issues involving medical affairs, clinical research, and drug advertising. Let's get into it. If you like this type of content, please like, subscribe, share. It really helps the channel. What is ad promo? Who is in it? And what do we do?
We're the gatekeepers. We're the ones who get to say no, right? But hopefully we're saying no as in K-N-O-W versus no as in N-O. Historically, I think when people say advertising and promotion, you're looking at, they think anyway, that we just look at materials that are going to promote a product and what commercial is looking to promote a product and how to put that out. Why I don't like to call it advertising and promotion or ad prom and would rather call it commercialization reg or commercial reg is the fact that we're actually looking at all of the components of once a product is approved or anything that relates to that kind of externally, that kind of business element and that organizational kind of element for that. So if we're looking at the fact that promotion or what you're able to promote on once you've gotten marketing approval is all based on labeling, then it makes sense to me that you should be sitting in, and I loved those aspects when I worked at Amgen years ago of sitting in on the label working group meetings next to the global commercial lead going, okay, so if we put the label in this, if we put this language in this based on what you want to do strategically, you can do this, you can't do this, and this would be why. So FDA might remove this image that you really want to use commercially in your labels. Is there a way that we could put the information in the label that would still be, everybody would be in alignment, that would be consistent with, and how do you do those kind of aspects? And because you're going in for earlier, I think that is helpful because so much of the time, to give another example, there was one time that I was working on a product and we're getting there, and at the very end, it's like, okay, so help us with this product, and we now have to take 24 pills a day, and how do you commercialize that product effectively? I mean, sure, we can put in the balance to try to make sure that it's not misleading.
You raise an interesting question. Does the Chevron decision, or technically the post-Chevron world, cause the FDA to reevaluate, and technically the FTC to reevaluate the way ads must be considered? I would say no. And I'll tell you why I would say no. I would say no because it's a lower standard. Mm-hmm. And if I were... the only way the courts come in and say, no, you regulate at the substantial evidence standard is if someone goes, no, we want you to hold us to a higher standard. Why would you?
No one's going to do that. We want the lowest common denominator, right?
Exactly. So to me, at a practical level, I'm not worried about cars becoming being eliminated. I think what we might get is more support for substantial evidence as we continue, but the FDA is not incentivized to go challenge themselves, and no one else is.
No one else is. No, I mean, and if you look at the number of letters that are out, and if you look at the process that needs to go through in order to get a letter out, the process has changed over the number of years that we've been there, and I think that that's something important to consider. And people need to understand that there's a reason why there was more letters earlier and the various changes that led to less letters. Now, when I look back and I look at the ones that are from, the 2000s, and I loved those letters because they were very educational in the way that they laid it out. This is the problem and this is why it was the problem. And this is how, I felt that they were very nicely laid out for learnings, for how to, what to look for and what to consider.
If you are, as an administrative agency, are going to enforce using your own letters, then you should be forced to actually then cite those letters. Don't make me guess where you got information from.
I mean, even if you look back, and one of the things that I've noticed as I looked back, because I was developing a training for some people and they wanted to understand, the 33 ways something's false and misleading, right? If we're looking back in those and trying to, and I think that that's an important thing to understand. I mean, these regulations were written in the 60s, right? One or two things have changed in our world since then. And so I was trying to go back and go, okay, if these are so important and these are 33 ways that are so important, then I want to be able to, because as adult learners, we learn by example better. I want to, in essence, set up a case study for each one. And so I was like, I'm going to go back and look to see which actual regs were cited in these. And then it's amazing the number of regs that aren't actually ever cited because they're citing not those 33, but they're going back and citing the bigger 201 5 where you are
USC, the actual
right
law itself. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it would be nice, just exactly to your point, if we could dig down. Of course, the agency has so many other elements that they're responsible for, right? And a lot of people don't understand.
I think that's a cop out.
They're not just sitting there looking through the 12,000, 101,000 pieces that are submitted to them.
But I agree with you. I think the fact is that they are very, very busy. But the fact is that you took the time out to write this letter. You took the time to call out the fact that we're doing it wrong. Tell us based on what? So that if we want to challenge it, we know what we're responding to.
We know what we're responding to. And there was a time period, and it's kind of gone back and forth. If you look, there was a time period when they cited the specific 33 ways more, and then it's kind of gone away and it's kind of got back. And there was a time period where you knew you could break it down to, if you're overstatement of efficacy, if you are, omission of, of risk, you could break it down into the categories. And now it's just, in essence, kind of gone back to two categories. You still have, pre-approval promotion rarely, but so maybe three. But, the point is you used to be able to break it down further, and you could kind of educate or communicate to your team members of, these are kind of the ones that all kind of fall into this bucket, and so these are our learnings and these are our things to watch out for.
Companies will start taking, whether it's a drug company or a device company, they're going to start challenging the FDA, going, you didn't justify it, then you don't get to rely on it afterwards.
Well, no, right. And I think that they could do that. And I think that one of the things that people have a tendency to, when I've had conversations with commercial organizations, a lot of times they're like, yeah, but for regulatory, I mean, really, we're going to get a letter. And, that is the cost of doing business. Even if we're looking at litigation out of it, the size of the litigation, the settlements are still kind of built into the cost of doing business because it's not affecting it overall. They're not, even when they're really large, I mean, honestly, they're not large enough to really kind of take away the advantages of what you get when you're selling it.
Do you only do drugs, or do you also do devices?
I do some device, not as much.
Yeah.
Mainly drug and biologic.
Okay. The reason I ask the question is, let's be honest, and this is true with biologics as well. They're both a little bit more of the wild, wild west compared to drugs.
Yeah.
The regs are not as clear. And we overall basically go, if it applies to drugs, we're sort of going to apply it to devices. We recognize that the rules are slightly different. In a post-Chevron world where there's no deference and there are no guidances, what happens to this white space, if you will, around compliance? Device companies tend to be much faster and looser.
Aggressive.
Thank you. Much more aggressive than drug companies, especially large pharma.
You have to think of it also as the business aspect. A lot of the goals of small pharma, and might be the same with small device, I would assume. I don't know for sure, but let's be theoretical, right? Yep. A lot of times what they're trying to do is figure out a way to get their name recognition out there, because at the end of the day, they're hoping to get by. And so they're wanting to get more of that market share. They're wanting to have more people talk about them. And in order to do that, they're willing to be more aggressive,
Sure.
Kind of in that bell curve, put it of how you do your promotion, put it more, skew it kind of more.
Will that aggressiveness now become the norm, shifting the bell curve itself?
The bell curve has been shifting, and it has been generally getting more and more aggressive. And in my opinion, what you've been seeing is with the agency is, just providing rules, not saying that you can't be more aggressive, but providing rules to help put the data out in that more aggressive environment. I mean, if you take a lot of the stuff, I mean, just look at us now versus look at the way that things were in like 2009, right? When if you got an enforcement letter, pretty much you knew some state attorney general was going to be looking into your marketing practices, right? And you should just start to plan that. And it in that environment, so much of what we put regularly in whether it be in a television advertisement or journal ad or whatever, any promotional external facing material, we would never think of putting in then. Now it is, our norm has become much more aggressive. And I think that that's going to continue to evolve. The vast majority, it's hard to come up with. It's hard. I mean, look at the number of times. I'm going to use an example of competent and reliable information, right? How much of the time was competent and reliable information utilized in 2009-ish, 2008, when we had all of those things? You'd have it some, but not a lot, and it wouldn't be as aggressive as it is now. Now, not only do you have the competent and reliable a lot, people are making claims on the competent and reliable, where the FDA has clearly stated, or if you're going to give this information, let's put it without claims on it. And now companies are trying to use it first before their primary and secondary endpoints, right? And then they're just going to start with the tertiary endpoints. And because that's where the messages sound good. And, here, while they're not, there's not the alpha power for them, and there's not, the methodologic kind of requirements that you might hope to talk about first. That's kind of where we're shifting, and people are wanting to talk about that first and then kind of back support it with those pivotal trials. And so how are we looking to get comfortable with that? Or how are we looking to get comfortable with the fact of we want to talk about having patient advocates speak, and our endpoint was a composite endpoint, but yet here is this patient, and they want to talk about one element of that. And how do we get comfortable talking about one element? I mean, you're seeing those are the types of things that we're having to talk about frequently. And how do we balance that? How do we disclaim it? How do we put our important note? And yet, while the agency has said, the important note doesn't mitigate the risk of this, that's really becoming the standard of what everybody's promoting on, and the level of their promotion. Or then you can actually take it and look even at medical affairs, and we all saw how medical affairs has evolved over the time, right? And the more and more pressure that you have for them communicating things that I would say, we're getting almost back to the pre-Franklin days with the way that medical affairs is behaving. And so it'll be interesting to see kind of how it all just continues to evolve.
Everyone goes, compliance has become a much bigger deal, and compliance is much more in control. On the other hand, I would actually take a contrarian view, and I would also argue that while compliance has become more important, I think a lot of regulatory medical advice is now being seen as sort of a risk angle and not sort of the gatekeepers, which I think is problematic.
It is problematic. And I do think there are some companies that I'm aware of, and it is now pretty much an advisory role. And then you also have to consider the fact of, are people understanding what is the level of knowledge that you're getting from the different people who are in and providing advice. And I think that's something to keep in mind.
Any big parting words?
I think it's important to, have the discussions and bring legal and medical, commercial, and regulatory in those early, back to what originally we were starting with, to the earlier strategic kind of discussions early on. I think that's what's going to make, at the end of the day, less problems in the reviews, the post-commercial reviews, those MLRs, as if we have a say in the development of the trials and stuff early on.
Thank you again, Katie. This was amazing. For assistance with your advertising compliance needs, feel free to contact us at Darshan@Kulkarni